Hello and welcome to Alchemy 101, the show that explores all avenues of transformation and aims to offer some useful nuggets that can support us in living in line with nature in a way that's true to our nature, no matter how contrary that might seem, just like this nightingale, a bird that sings out in the dark. I'm JJ, the Practical Alchemist, and I'm delighted that you could join me today for what was sometimes a raw and emotional conversation with psychiatrist, coach and author Dr. Mark Goulston. Mark was professor of psychiatry at the University of California in Los Angeles for more than 25 years, and he's a former FBI and police hostage negotiation trainer. He's an expert in effective communication, has written many books, including one called Just Listen, and his latest project is a video, What I Wish My Parents Knew. It's a project that aims to address the very real issue of teenage angst and suicide, and it's something very close to his heart. I asked him to tell me more about it.
Well, the director of it and the main producer, and I've become an executive producer of it, trying to get it out to places like this show. Jason Reed's 14-year-old son died by suicide 4 years ago. And he left a note saying, "Tell my story." And Jason put in over $200,000 and made a documentary, which is on Amazon Prime, called Tell My Story. And in that, he interviewed people who were touched by it, family members, teenagers who had felt suicidal, and experts. And I was one of the experts. And that's how we came to get to know each other. And what was most riveting from that video was the teenagers talking about their low points. They weren't in crisis, during the filming of those teenagers. And so what I wish my parents knew is a 45-minute documentary in which Jason talks to 10 teenagers about their low points, about when they were sad. And there's green screens behind them. It's not really all that polished, but it's mesmerizing. And here are some of the things that I've learned since being associated with it. First of all, I need a better word than I'm excited about it, because it's such a painful subject, but I am excited about it because I've been looking for a vehicle that will change the way parents and teenagers speak to each other, because I'm not sure how it is in England or Great Britain, but in America, it's very transactional. Did you do your homework? Why are you eating that? Why are you staying in your room? You're on your computer too much. Why don't you go get some exercise? And children react accordingly. I'm fine. Leave me alone. I'll get it done. And so, at least in America, a lot of the conversations are like that. And what I wish my parents knew shows that underneath, teenagers are in a lot of pain. And here are some insights that I've gotten from the project. What I realize is that when teenagers complain, blame, make excuses, or threaten, "I'm going to quit school, I'm going to drop out," when parents hear any of those four things, it triggers parents. What it does is it scares parents, but parents don't show their fear. They get more frustrated and angry, and it doesn't go well. And what I realize is that when you can share, and this is not just teenagers, when you can share what you're feeling underneath, and it's not a complaint, it's not blaming, it's not making excuses, and it's not threatening. When you can share that, it's a little bit like, animals baring their neck or showing their underbelly to a predator. It gets a different reaction from parents. And I believe that when parents watch this 45 minutes of these teens, they'll see their teenager in it. And they'll go back to their teens, or they'll watch it with their teens if they're high school age, and they'll be much softer. Have you ever felt what those teenagers are talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally related to a lot of it. Yeah, absolutely. And it is very powerful because these kids they're just opening up honestly, without any fuss or any frills, and just talking about what they feel. And you can see that for a lot of them, or for all of them probably, it's the first time maybe that somebody has actually asked them, what was that like? What were you feeling? And you can see that they're they're having to dig deep to describe those feelings. And I wonder whether this isn't a good time to just listen to the trailer, and so that people get a taste of the power of this. Let's just listen to just a few minutes of this trailer. So powerful.
My kid, he'll be fine. He just needs to toughen up.
Honey, it's your first crush. There'll be others. Just get over it.
You go talk to her. She's just gonna yell at me again. Besides, she'll cool off by morning.
You don't want to eat? Fine. Starve yourself.
Those other kids are just playing around. You just need to loosen up.
It's all a little fuzzy on what was going through my head at that time. I honestly don't really remember. It's very fuzzy to me, but I just remember I was just upset, angry, and just done. And I guess it all just kind of built up to that moment.
So somehow in your head you thought being dead was better than being alive?
Correct.
I felt like I wasn't supposed to cry. I felt like I wasn't supposed to tell people how I was feeling. I felt like that was weakness. So what I did instead is I tried to show strength by never crying, by bottling everything up, by making sure that nobody knew how I felt. That was my sole goal, because I didn't want to be a burden to anyone else.
I think I held in a lot of what I was going through. I would share with people my external life circumstances. I would say, yeah, my dad's going through a hard time, or things are difficult at home. But I would never tell people the extent to which I felt internally, or what thoughts I was getting.
Camera 3.
So when I was 7 and 8, I would say that's when I first realized that something with me was different than what I was told to believe. And I started having a lot of self-hate roll in because I thought I was something wrong. I thought I was something out of my control. I knew it was something out of my control, so because of that I was wrong and basically just not a human in ways.
I don't feel like there's one exact point, but once I started getting closer with my friends, because when all of this was happening, I wasn't talking to anyone. I was just kind of distancing myself. I wasn't going out, hanging out, going to play basketball at the park, nothing. So I feel like once I started making an effort to be around people that I knew liked me, I guess, I feel like once I was around them and I was happy and I felt safe, I feel like that was a turning point that I realized that I kind of matter.
Well, it blows my mind actually. And I so relate to so much that these teenagers are saying. The first girl who speaks, absolutely, that could have been me at various times during my childhood, growing up into my early teens. Absolutely. And it makes me think as well of how different my life might have been had I been able to talk to my parents. And this is what you want to change, isn't it?
Absolutely. When Jason and I have been doing presentations, one of the things that I've shared with audiences, and then I'll ask the audience, is how many of you can remember fewer than 5 times in your entire relationship with your parents ever having a completely emotionally raw conversation? How many of you remember fewer than 5 times? And most of the people raised their hands.
Yep, my hand would go up.
I can remember 3 times with my father. One time was when he came down with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
He was just struggling to remember things, and he was failing. And my mother had called me to come over to the East Coast. I live in California. They were living in Florida. And she said, he's driving me crazy. And I remember I went there. I'll just share the anecdote. And I was there for, I think, 4 days. And the night before I was about to leave, having failed at all attempts to get him to go for a walk, just break out of it, he looked at my mother and he looked at me, and then he looked at both of us and said, do me a favor. Don't visit again so soon. Just get off my back, both of you. So I felt, I failed. Mm-hmm. The great psychiatrist couldn't break through to his own family.
Yeah.
So the next morning, before I was to get on the plane, there was my father staring out in this porch, and you could see a golf course in the distance. And I'm not sure what was on his mind. And I was looking at the galley copy of my first book, which is called Get Out of Your Own Way, which is 26 years old, and it still seems to be doing reasonably well. And I was looking at the galley copy, and there was one chapter of the 40 chapters of self-defeating behaviors, and that chapter was trying to change other people. And at the end of each chapter, which are 3 or 4 pages, I believe it said, don't try to change others. Accept them as they are and hope they change, instead of not accepting them at all until they change. So I read that, and there's my father, looking out away from me. And I thought to myself, this book could do well. And then I put it down and I said to myself, why don't you practice what you preach?
Yeah, yeah.
And so to understand the power of what happened next, my father grew up during the Depression. I'd never seen him cry. He was someone who didn't like certain words that were scary, such as cancer. He had colon cancer 20 years earlier, and my mother said, don't tell him he has it, he'll just dwell on it. So picture that mindset, if you can. I put the book down, and instead of my trying to persuade him, maybe the way parents try to persuade teens, I put the book down, and it wasn't my words, it was the inviting tone. And I said, hey, Dad, how are you doing? I just invited him. So it was more the melody than the lyrics. And he was not an introspective person either. Good guy, worked hard to support his family. And so he looks over at me, and then he looks away. He looks over at me, and then he looks down, and he said, I never thought it would turn out this way. And he teared up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he looked at me and he was trying to concentrate with whatever he had left to concentrate. And his face is scrunching up and he says to me, "What is Alzheimer's disease?"
Oh.
And I said, you just got me, JJ. I said, well, it's when your memory for what just happened isn't working. You can remember things 70 years ago, but you can't remember 5 minutes ago. And then I'll never forget it. His face it's like he was concentrating with whatever he could. And then he looked at me like I'm looking at you, and he's like this in pain. And he said, "Do I have it?" And I said, "I don't know. You used to have a photographic memory and you're older, and I don't know." And then I went over and I kissed him on the forehead and we went for a walk. So can you see the power of that?
Yeah.
And that's what we hope, what I wish my parents knew. And that was one of 3 times when he and I connected at that level. And I think it's very rare, not because people don't want to connect, they just don't know how to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So can you relate to any of what I'm saying?
I completely relate. And my father did have Alzheimer's. And one of the most tender moments when I felt closest to him was when he was on the verge of dementia and was looking back over the past, obviously, and we were sitting down and I was just chatting to him, and he suddenly said, he suddenly told me that he loved me, which I don't actually remember him saying that much ever. That was a big thing. And he was saying things like, I've made I've done things wrong. I've made mistakes, but you don't have to. You don't have to. You can do things the right way. And much as I hate to interrupt there, we have to take a short break right now. We'll pick up on the conversation with Dr. Mark Goulston right after these messages.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And we're back with Alchemy 101. Now, before the break, I shared a tender exchange I had with my late father some years ago. Here's Mark Goulston again in response to that.
So we're having a conversation, JJ. So can I share something that just got triggered?
Yeah, do.
I collect quotes. And there was one quote that I heard, and I'll credit a woman named Dr. Shani Duperon, and she has a program called Project Forgive.
Mm-hmm.
And her quote was, "Forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive."
Mm-hmm.
And when she told me that, since we're talking about parents, it blew me away. I mean, literally my head just fell back.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine my father, who could be on the critical side and not that expressive. And my father died in 1995. So this is 5 years ago. And I imagine him giving me this apology, which I never received. I imagine him saying, "Remember when I used to tell you when you'd come up with, one of your ideas, what makes you think you know anything about anything?" And I would put you down whenever you put up with something that was kind of unconventional, because he was good with numbers. He was an accountant, and he was much better with numbers and analytical thinking than really connecting emotionally to anyone. And so I imagine him saying, "Remember when I used to say, what makes you think you know anything about anything?" I was talking about myself. And because I knew a lot about numbers, but there was a lot I didn't know about. And when you would bring up things that I didn't know about, I would get nervous because it made me realize how little I knew about a lot of things. And I wasn't speaking about you. I was speaking about me and what you've accomplished in your life. The people you've helped, even saved. I don't deserve you as my son. And I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And when I imagine him saying that, here's another insight I got about the subject of forgiveness. When I realized that down deep, he would say that and feel that. He didn't have those words. But when I realized that, I apologized to him. I said, I should have known that. And I've been holding a grudge, not a big one, but a bit of a grudge against you for that statement and other statements. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because, I got to be close to people in my life. I got to be emotionally close to my family, my friends, JJ. and you're the one who missed out.
Yeah.
And then you died. And I'm sorry that I held it against you. And what I realize that there's a part of forgiveness that once you forgive someone else, if you've been holding on to a resentment or a grudge towards them, you may have to ask for forgiveness.
Oh, I can so feel that. And with my experience with my parents, with my father, I resented him for so long because of all the things that I perceived he had done. Now, he wasn't a saint, but as a teenager, did I really take into consideration the stresses and the issues that were all going? No, I didn't. I just felt the result of that. Yeah. Yeah. So what you're doing now is, having had that experience, and we've both had something of that experience, is helping other people break that cycle and say it doesn't have to be this way. People don't have to grow up this way. People don't have to have these experiences if we just listen and we're open. I love what you said about it being the melody, not the lyrics necessarily. So the tone, the invitation, how wonderful is that? If people could just understand that and get away from the ordering children around, saying, do this, do that. Yeah. So important. Yeah.
I'm going to share something with you. And I'm actually going to try something with you.
Yeah.
Don't get nervous, JJ. I never take someone out on a limb and leave them there. Okay.
Okay. You'll bring me back in again, will you? That's okay.
Take a deep breath. So 4 years ago, I spoke in Moscow along with the Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman. He wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. And I was a speaker because some of my books have done pretty well in Russia. And what I introduced, and I've been trying to introduce to the world, and I'm going to introduce to your world and you, is to realize that underneath people listening to you, they're always listening for something. And if you can know that it's always present, whenever a conversation is going badly or sideways, if you can just pause as opposed to letting it escalate and just bring them back in by saying, can we stop for a moment? Because when we started, you were listening for something and you didn't hear it. In fact, we've gotten further away from it. which may explain why our conversation is going badly. So let me give you an example of it. So this is where I'm going to take you out on a limb.
Okay.
So you're listening to me.
Mm-hmm.
We're having this conversation.
Yeah.
You're wanting to cover certain topic areas related to my background and my books and what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But underneath it, I think you're listening for the following. And tell me how this lands. I think the trust and confidence that your listeners and viewer have in you matters to you. In fact, you want to honor their trust and confidence. And one of the last things you would want to do is waste their time, because time is precious. So I'm guessing that you're listening for guests who can bring your listeners and viewers immediate value that will make their lives better. And you're also listening for guests who are terrible and who you have to go back and say, I don't know how to say this, but we can't post it. You know, even though they were best-selling authors or whatever, you're thinking to yourself, they were terrible. I can't do this to my listeners or viewers. But can you feel what I'm saying, that you really want to honor the trust and confidence that your listeners and viewers have in you by giving them value?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Giving them value. That's so right. And I am always listening. It's interesting. Yeah, you're right. I'm always listening for something underneath. You know, I hear the words, but there's always something underneath. And isn't that true of what we might do on a more regular basis in everyday life? And then we can, that is communication. And you don't need so many words for that kind of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. In my book, Just Listen, I have little acronyms so that people can remember things. And one of the things we talk about in the book is try to be a pal. I'm not sure the word pal is, they even use that in
a mate. Try to be a mate. Yeah.
Try to be a mate.
Yeah.
But in America, I call it try to be a pal in your communication. And what PAL stands for is purposeful, agendaless listening.
Nice.
Purposeful, agendaless listening, meaning let go of your personal agenda of trying to push someone and have your purpose be, let's connect first, and connect. It's an overused term, but authentically, and in a real way, and then build on wherever that takes us.
So losing the agenda, get rid of the agenda and just be there.
And one of the ways to lose the agenda, and again, I don't want to repeat myself more than once, but if you can just accept the fact that whoever you're with is listening for something, and just letting go of your agenda and knowing that they're listening for something and being curious about it can change the conversation.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And it comes back to the idea of energy as well, our communication being energy as well as just words. And people say that words have an energy. Well, yes, they have a power, but this underlying energy is so powerful, even more powerful. Even sitting in silence, but making that connection with somebody can be powerful, can't it?
Absolutely. And when you just said the word, even sitting in silence, and a lot of what mindfulness is, is listening for increasing your awareness instead of your agenda. So a lot of mindfulness is focusing on your breathing. Just being aware of your breathing and slowing it down and calming it. I know I'm putting you to sleep, JJ.
No, you're not. You're not putting me to sleep. No, not yet. But no, you won't.
But just shifting to being aware as opposed to having an agenda that's driving things. It can shift the energy.
Yeah. The same can be said in many different areas of life. It's not just in, one-to-one family relationships or work relationships, anywhere. Just going into something without any agenda and just noticing first, before you actually start talking or interact. It can be so powerful and so helpful as well, especially with a difficult situation. Yeah, I can see that.
You mentioned another one of my favorite words in what you just said. One of my mentors was a leadership thought leader named Warren Bennis. He may not be known in Britain, but he's certainly well known in America.
I've heard of him, yeah.
And he shared a quote with me that he got from a playwright, Saul Bellow. And Saul Bellow, and here's the word you used, Saul Bellow said, be a first-class noticer.
Yeah.
Because noticing is different than looking, watching, or seeing. When you look, watch, or see, you're an observer, you're passive. But when you notice, you really connect. And again, to combine that to what I just said previously, you could say to someone, I notice that our conversation is going in a direction that neither of us want. And so I think if you can take that with you, be a first-class noticer. I'll give you an exercise that I've shared with people to be able to increase their awareness and give them a breather from their agenda. What I tell people is when you're going for a walk, especially if you can do this out in nature with a beautiful landscape, as you're walking forward, you're a telephoto lens. You're walking into the environment. So notice that feeling, you have purpose, you have intention, you're going to conquer what's in front of you. The exercise is now turn around and walk backwards. You go from a telephoto lens to a wide angle lens.
Interesting, yes.
And when you do that and you're watching and being a wide angle lens, you can feel the world wanting to reveal itself to you.
I love that.
When you're marching forward, you're going to take charge. You're going to take the hill. You're going to master whatever's in front of you.
A totally different perspective, obviously, but the effect that would have on you is quite profound. Yes, I love that. I shall do that tomorrow. It's a bit late here now as we're talking, so I'm not going to go out and do that in the dark right now. But I shall do that tomorrow.
Throughout nature, I wouldn't do it if you're walking along a narrow narrow path on some mountain, along some mountain. You'll fall off.
I wouldn't recommend that either. But what I might do is I'll do that tomorrow morning. I'll maybe I'll go swimming in the morning and in the sea, and I'll maybe walk into the sea backwards. How would that be? And I did that very thing one morning after we spoke. It was very interesting and certainly a different experience. It's time for another short break, though, right now. More from Dr. Mark Goulston right after these messages.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And you're listening to Alchemy 101 here on UK Health Radio with me, JJ Stenhouse, and Dr. Mark Goulston. Getting back to the video, What I Wish My Parents Knew, I asked Mark whether speaking in the video helped the teens who took part and how people had reacted to it when they saw it. The film isn't on general release, and it's only being shown in specific circumstances.
Yeah, and the reason behind that, I'm the executive producer, and Jason, whose son died by suicide, he mentions that he's never been depressed. And he still doesn't understand it. But when he realized is that his son was very depressed, and being an entrepreneur, he would throw solutions at his son. And his son would say, I'm fine. And what he realized is that when you ask your teenager, how are you doing? And they say, I'm great, they're usually good. But when they say, I'm fine, they're not. And so, part of the response to this from parents is, we get it. What do we do? So I want to give further value to your listeners and viewers. So one of the things that we share is what we call the 4 prompts. And this is something that parents can do to possibly open up their teenagers who aren't being very open. And we recommend that you do this when you're doing an activity together, possibly driving somewhere, because if you try to initiate a heart-to-heart talk with a teenager and they don't initiate it, they hate it.
Yeah.
It's like nails on a chalkboard. And but when you're doing an activity, here is the script. And then, people will be able to replay this and get the 4 prompts. And the script goes something like this. You say to your teenager, a lot of us parents are worried about our teenagers because of the pandemic, because of all the stress, because of lockdown, masks, and all that. And I'm one of those parents who's worried. Can I just run some things by you? And hopefully they'll say, okay, mom, okay, dad, as opposed to no.
Yeah.
And then here's the first prompt. And you say it calmly. At its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And they're going to go, what? And you say, at its worst, at its most painful, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And they may say, pretty awful. And there's a technique that I've given a name to that I use with my suicidal patients fairly effectively called surgical empathy. And surgical empathy means going in deeper and connecting. So when they say, pretty awful, you say, pretty awful or very awful? Okay, mom. Okay, dad. Very awful. The second prompt. And you want them to open up. So you're not just checking boxes because I gave you 4 prompts. You say, tell me about that, and get them to open up more. And the second prompt is, when you're feeling that way, how alone do you feel with it? Pretty alone. Surgical empathy. Pretty alone or all alone? Okay, all alone. The third prompt. And again, you get them to talk it out. Tell me more about that. How long's that been going on? The third prompt is, take me to the last time you felt it. And they're going to look at you and say, what? And say, when was the last time you felt that awful all alone? Was it a few nights ago when we heard you walking around in the bedroom and in the middle of the night? Or take me to it. And something special happens when they describe something so clearly that you can see it with your eyes. When that happens, they re-feel it, but they're not alone. Yes, I couldn't sleep. I was walking around. What happened? Well, I had a test the next day and I just didn't know what to do. That sounds awful. What'd you do next? I didn't know whether to kick the wall, punch the wall. I just couldn't stand it. Then what'd you do? I started looking for cough medicine. I started looking for your sleeping pills, Mom. You got them hidden somewhere. Well, then what happened? The sun rose. And I felt a little better. The fourth prompt is the most important one. And you say, I have a favor to ask you. And hopefully, if you've done the first 3 prompts and you've had a conversation, you may have earned the right to eye contact. And you say, I have a favor to ask you. It's more than a favor, but we'll keep it as a favor. Next time you're feeling that way, or even going down the road to feeling that way, I want you to do whatever it takes to get my undivided attention. or your dad's undivided attention. Because we have a million things in our minds, and there's nothing more important to either of us than helping you feel less alone when you're feeling that awful. So would you do that for me? And by the way, don't ever think you're a burden to either of us. Yeah, you frustrate us, when you complain or whatever, and we get frustrated. Yeah, sure, we get frustrated, but you are not a burden to either of us. And here's my proof of that. When you grow up and you have children, and you have a child like you, if you're lucky, they will open up to you the way you're opening up to me, and it won't be a burden.
That's beautiful. So beautiful. And, maybe the words might change. And what strikes me is that you use the word awful a lot. Now, it's very fashionable these days to say, no, you've got to be positive. But it's important, I'm seeing, to go where the other person is, to recognize what they're feeling and not dismiss it. What do they call that? They call it
it's called attunement. When you connect with someone empathically where they're at, it's called attunement.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's great to have the power of positive thinking, but if the message that you're giving them is that I don't want to hear anything negative, let's focus on the positive. What's happening is life hits you with a lot of things that cause you to feel hurt and angry and negative. And if you're not able to express that, you push it down. And there's a cumulative effect.
Yeah.
I'll share a story with you that because people tend to remember stories. We have 3 children, 40, 37, and 32. And my wife gets all the credit for their turning out so well, having each other's back, and gifting us with 3 grandchildren that we get to see almost every day.
Oh, lovely.
And my oldest child, who was a firstborn, had difficulty sharing her mother with our secondborn and our thirdborn, when they were born. That's not unusual.
No.
To appreciate this story, you need to realize I'm a thirdborn and my wife is a secondborn. So neither of us are firstborn. So I can remember that when our last child was born, our oldest was 7, and she was just acting up. She was just, swearing, I hate my life and all these things. And my wife would say, you got to go calm her down. And I can remember we were, I was facing off with this primal hurt and anger in my 7-year-old daughter. And she would say something. And if I reacted transactionally, I'd say, young lady, you better go up to your room and calm down. You can't talk like that. So if I had done that, she would have gone upstairs and I wouldn't have heard what she said. Knowing that there was something going on driving this behavior, I just kept drilling down. What is it, honey? I hate my life. What is it? I want time with mom. And I just kept pestering her. And then at one point, when it was clear I wasn't going away and that I knew there was something traumatic going on underneath it all, she looked at me and she said, I was the first to be born. I'll be the first to die.
Wow.
I'm not a firstborn. And you might think, psychiatrist kid, grandparents are dying, dogs are dying, 6, 7, you're starting to see that life ends. And so she says that I was the first to be born. I'll be the first to die. And then she ran across the room, jumped up on the coffee table, and then threw her arms around my neck and just grabbed onto me And she said, "Daddy, keep talking."
Oh.
And I looked up at the ceiling and my eyes teared up and I said, "God, thank you for letting me do this one right." Because if that's what was terrorizing her, something that her mom and I couldn't understand because we're not firstborns.
Mm-hmm.
So do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm not saying, oh, they should dwell on the negative.
No.
But what surgical empathy is, by the way, it's a process I used with people who were suicidal, because what I realized is that when you're really feeling hopeless, helpless, worthless, useless, life is meaningless and purposeless and pointless, you're feeling without reasons to live, and you pair with death to take the pain away. Well, I can always kill myself.
Yeah.
And you form a psychological adhesion. It's not an attachment, it's an adhesion, kind of what happens after surgery when organs get stuck together. And surgical empathy means you're going to go into that adhesion where they're feeling felt by death, saying, "I'll take your pain away." And when they feel felt by you, which is different than feeling understood or throwing treatment at them, when they feel felt by you and they feel less alone in the dark night of the soul, they start to cry with relief.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can you see how all this sort of fits together? And
absolutely. And the word I was searching for earlier was that it was gaslighting. So, not accepting the word awful or not using the word awful and not acknowledging those feelings is a form of gaslighting. But yes, you have to form that empathy. And what a lovely story of how you managed to reach your own child that way. I'm really sad to say we're coming to the end of our time here now, but just thinking back over our conversation, it's been so rich and so full of incredibly useful, sage advice for people who are trying to deal with these family dynamics and don't have a clue what to do. I would definitely say rewind on this. Rewind. You can see how old I am. Go back and play this again. Look at the 4 prompts. Practice those. Absolutely brilliant way of getting through to somebody in that situation. And check out all your work as well. They can find it at your website, which I think is markgoulston.com. Is it? Am I right there? Yeah, markgoulston.com. Yeah. And also, if people are interested in the video, in the movie, and showing that somewhere, do they just get in touch with you and ask?
Yeah, you can connect with me by going to my website, markgoulston.com. My LinkedIn profile is probably more up to date than my website, so you can contact me through LinkedIn as well.
Yeah,
and then reach out and say, we're interested in showing this for our secondary school or junior high school to a group of parents. How do we go about that? What we're also finding interesting. And I'm in conversations with McKinsey, the big consulting company, and an organization called the Family Office Exchange, which is the 380 wealthiest families in the world, and it helps them in family businesses. So we may be doing something together, because if you're listening in, here's a favor I'm asking all of you: is if you're in a large organization, and an organization wants to show they care about their employees, if you're in a large organization, have the head of human resources or the appropriate person reach out anonymously to all the employees and say, how many of you are worried about the mental health of one of your children? So see what they say in response to that. And then the second question would be, if you're worried about the mental health of one of your children, how consuming and distracting is it and getting in the way actually of your productivity? Because that's what the company would be concerned about, is lost productivity. And then reach out with those two questions, and people may say, well, why are you asking? Well, we have a resource that might help with that. Because it's our belief that if you're a large organization or company and you can help families who are having difficulties with the mental health of one of their children, that employee is going to be incredibly appreciative and loyal to you. Mm-hmm. And so we think there's an opportunity there, and we hope to see where that goes.
Well, what a gift. Mark Goulston, thank you so much for coming on the show. And maybe you'll come back another time.
Thank you. I'd love to come back, and maybe we can invite questions and you'll collect them, and we could do a follow-up show if people were touched by any of what we talked about. And you can say, Mark, a number of people wrote in or called in, and can we just take them?
Ooh.
Be happy to see where we go with that.
Great idea. Thank you so much. And the email to write to is jj@jjsalchemy.com, or message me, The Practical Alchemist, on Facebook or Instagram. We'd love to hear your questions for Dr. Mark Goulston to answer in a future show. Remember, you can download Alchemy 101 from the ukhealthradio.com website, but you can also find this show on the UK Health Radio podcast. You'll find us on all the major streaming platforms. Just search for the show and follow us. And if you like what you hear, check out our sister publication, Health Triangle Magazine. It's a great read, and you'll find out how to access it at ukhealthradio.com. Meanwhile, do remember to join me again for more Alchemy 101 here on UK Health Radio. Until then, it's goodbye from me and that nightingale.